Hey guys, it's Harry here again today with a new review for you, and this is going to be on Insurgent, which is the sequel to Divergent by Veronica Roth. Insurgent was first published on the 1st of May 2012 and is approximately 525 pages long. I'd also recommend that you don't watch this review if you haven't read Divergent, because I'm probably going to talk about some spoilers in that, just giving a quick summary of what Insurgent's about. Because Insurgent, it starts off on the train just after the enslaved Dauntless army nearly wipes out the entirety of the Abnegates faction. It starts off with Triss, for Caleb, Peter and Marcus, Tobias's dad, and they're fleeing to the Amity headquarters because they feel that's where they can go to get refuge at this point in the story. Now this is where the story automatically gets a bit jumbled up, and since I'd consider this near enough a war book in this series, I think this is going to be where the most clashes out of the three books. The story's a bit higgledy-piggledy and there's a lot going on throughout, and in short they're just running around the different factions, collecting information, sitting around with the survivors, planning, and we find out a lot about the different factions. That's something I was missing in Divergent and I wanted there to be in Insurgent, and I was happy with the amount of information we got about the other factions, like with the Kandor and the Amity, and even with the Erudite when they're talking to the Erudite refugees, and later on when they actually go to that headquarters as well, and when Trish is inside there. No spoilers obviously. Throughout this like higgledy-biggledy plot there's a lot of character development, which is something that Veronica Roth does very well. The building on the characters in the first book, and it's built up with even more throughout this book, and that's something I really admire about her writing, because throughout this book Triss and Thor, they have like a couple of arguments and fallouts, and I just think it's something different. It's clearly going to happen because they're in a faction that's fighting to take back control and all this stuff, and they're obviously going to have fights and that. I found the way that Thor was handling it was a little annoying for me personally, but I still enjoyed the book as a whole and I still enjoy him as a character. Now, as I said, with this sort of plot higgledy-pigglediness, it was building up and the book was very suspenseful, I felt. There's a little, I don't know how to say this without spoiling it, but there's a little, there's a piece of information which we don't get to know until the end of the book, and it hit me right in the chest when I found out. For this book, it was very heartbreaking for me, just because of the way the character development was built up, and since it's war, people are gonna die, and it was just, it was shocking for me. And then when that final piece of information was released at the end of the book, it was like a proper kick in the teeth, and it was like, well, not the teeth, that's a little harsh, alright, it was a deep thud in my chest, and it was like, I was shocked, and my breath was taken away, and it was like, because it was left on a major cliffhanger, and I can't wait for the third book now. I can't wait another year to find out what's going to happen in the third one, because there was a couple of questions that weren't answered in the first and the second book, and it's to do with this piece of information. So if you read it, you know what I'm talking about, and the third book is probably going to be just about that. Now, even though that last piece of information at the end of the book was amazing, my favourite part of this book was when, this isn't really a spoiler so don't worry too much, was when all the Dauntless went back to their compound and there was a load of CCTV cameras, so they all got out their paintball guns and started shooting them to basically block off the Erudite from seeing them. But then it turned into basically everyone in the faction just having one big massive paintball fight, and I found this very refreshing for this book because it is a hard-hitting book with Trish going through everything that she's going through, and I just thought it was a nice little bonus thing in the book that she added just to lighten the mood a bit before everything went dark again. Since this book I consider it the bridging point between the beginning where we get all the information, this is basically a build-up for what's going to happen in the third book. I thought it was as good as Divergent, which is controversial because other people don't think it was, but I think it carries on the story nicely and it builds the development even more. So because of that, I am going to give it a 5 out of 5. In this section here, I'm going to be talking more about the spoiler points in this book. So if you haven't read it, I'd recommend that you don't watch this section of the book, but it's here for the people who have, and I'd like to discuss with them about some of the things that I think about this book that were interesting. So if you are still here and haven't read it, I recommend you go. But yeah, so the first point that I'd like to make is with Triss and how like distraught she is. I can see why some people wouldn't like this in the book, especially with the way she's acting even more selfish now, even more like her past faction, and it could probably bore some people. I can see why the whole relationship side of it would annoy some people because the arguments do get a little samey, but I feel that the character development that comes from that is worth it, and we're going to see that develop even more in the third book, and then reading the trilogy as a whole, it'll just be even nicer. And the second thing I want to talk about is the little piece of information we get at the end about a person being related to Triss and how they've had their minds wiped. The first thing I thought when I heard this was relating it to the Maze Runner, because I've just read the Maze Runner trilogy in between Divergent and Insurgent, and I'm not entirely sure what to think about this at first. I was a little taken back. That's why I enjoyed the ending so much, because typically I do not like cliffhangers whatsoever. I can see why they're there. The suspense was built up for that cliffhanger, and it's definitely made me want to read the book even more than I was going to, just to find out what actually is outside, what these people were like beforehand. Since we got the information of her being the second generation, I'm wondering if it's her gran, or if anything the person was her, maybe? I'm not entirely sure. But what I want to talk about is what's actually outside the gate. Are they gonna reach another civilization, maybe another project by these people, which I'm not 100% sure on, but maybe they're going to see some more civilization out there and they're going to have to interact with them, or if it is just going to be a barren land that they're then going to have to build a new society on. But if that happens, I can see there being a lot of rivalry against trying to appoint a leader, especially with not everyone being Divergent. So we'll just have to see what happens, and I'd like to know what you think about this subject and what you think's going to happen in the third book, so please leave a comment below. So thanks for watching this review, guys. Please like it, leave a comment on what you think's going to happen throughout the rest of the story, and subscribe if you haven't. I've been Harry.